Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. The Mission Committee is bringing you Andrew Mashas today, and he is, let me get this right, faith-based engagement specialist down at Church World Service. Now, we will not have Alex Swan today, who's the newly hired person for Harrisburg's office that they're getting set up. And I will find out hopefully where that stands today. And this is the group that we used for the joy offering and the Christmas offering at Christmas time. And so we don't yet have a final figure on that, so I'll hold off on that. But I'd just like to welcome Andrew, and he said he's going to do some storytelling and questions specifically. Go ahead and unmute yourself or type it in the chat box, and we'll try and keep an eye on it. Okay. And so welcome to everyone else who's just joined in the last minute. And Andrew, I'm going to let you take it away.
All right, well, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. I haven't done one of these in a while. Per Zoom, so this will be, I'm getting a little bit of deja vu here. My name is Andrew Mashas. I'm coming to you from my home. Welcome. So a couple of disclaimers before I get started to talk a little bit about not just what Church World Service does, certainly in the Lancaster area, but what the hope is for Church World Service to be able to do in the Harrisburg, Dauphin County area. So yeah, a few disclaimers. One, well, I'd say the biggest disclaimer is because we are on Zoom and because you are in my home and I am going to be unmuted while I talk, you may be privy to a variety of different shrieks and squeals and screaming and hopefully no crying from a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old who are down in the basement playing together. But every once in a while, someone hits somebody, someone pulls someone's hair, or someone just comes up here. I'm actually in my kitchen because I do not have office space in this house. So if you hear someone come up here screaming for a snack, yeah, don't worry, they're fine. But that is the lovely part of Zoom. I have asked them to not crash Zoom calls like they usually do, so we could just focus. Yeah, so that is the biggest disclaimer. I think I will certainly set some time towards the end for Q&A. Yeah, I think for Zoom, the best route is to, I think there is a there's a raise hand feature on Zoom. If we wanted to use that feature, there is the chat as well. But yeah, morning everyone. Again, it's good to be here. Like I said, my name is Andrew. I'm the faith-based engagement specialist at CWS. One more disclaimer that I'm realizing is that this is being recorded and will be broadcast, I believe, on various social media sites. And because of that, I'm going to try to keep a lot of the storytelling, a lot of the narrative and context that I give around the work that we do and the people that we serve a little bit nebulous and ambiguous, and not really use specific names of people, particularly our clients. And I also am going to refrain from using any significant visuals that would show faces like pictures. So a lot of this is going to be, you're going to need to use your imagination a little bit to protect their safety and privacy. And I'll certainly get into why that's so important for our clients. And hope, maybe by the end, there'll be a better understanding as to some of the dynamics that our clients have to face even in their lives today as to why we want to keep their lives a little bit more private in the world of online and social media things. So yeah, in my role at Church World Service, I have the lovely honor, and I thoroughly enjoy doing it, and I've been doing it for about a year now, of essentially finding sponsorship groups from churches who are willing to take the time to walk alongside refugee families upon their arrival to the United States. Refugees, as is defined by the 1951 Refugee Convention of the United Nations, categorizes specific people around this idea of someone who has fled their home in fear of persecution and violence based off of their race, their gender, their participation in a specific social group, or their religion. And so over the decades, really, I mean, the idea of people fleeing their home in the face of violence is nothing new to the human story. I often say that one could make an argument, and sometimes I do, I don't know if it's a good argument or not, that so much of human history, the way we understand the development of peoples around the world, civilizations and empires, that so much of that story is the idea around people relocating and finding new homes. I often make the argument that from cover to cover, from Genesis to Revelation, from the Exodus to exile, the Eden to eternity at the end, that Scripture, this thing that we have been given and are told is inspired by a divine creator, is in a sense written through the lens of people who are displaced. The words on those pages that I have been reading since I was my son's age, and I could start reading, and my dad bought me a King James Bible when I was in kindergarten for some reason. Those words that echo thousands and thousands of years are all told through the eyes of people who are displaced, who are searching for a new home in the midst of tragedy and violence and oppression. And so that story continues to this day. The way in which God uses the church to be able to live into that story, I believe, is very, very significant. I think in a lot of our lifetimes, not mine necessarily, but in my grandparents' lifetimes, my parents, there have been a number of very significant world events that have really Theo? No, thank you. Okay, that was number one. Pardon me. A number of significant world events that I read about in history books that really propelled movements of people, particularly to our own areas, to the United States. I believe that we all have narratives within our own family lines of what it meant for our ancestors to arrive to the United States. I know I have mine that are sort of embedded and infused in my mind, even as in growing up around this idea of Martin and Rose Mashas getting on a ship, leaving Warsaw, Poland, basically to find a better life, I believe in 1908, and somehow arriving to Scranton, Pennsylvania, to the anthracite coal mines, and what that meant for not just them, but their entire community. In the midst of that, in the midst of then, communist uprising in Eastern Europe, and yeah, all of these things that I think we don't always pause and think about how they shape who we are, who our society is, who our families are, and how we even raise up our next generations of, like, I'm clearly doing now. And so what are the world events today that are bringing people to our doorstep and bringing us new neighbors and hopefully friends from around the world? I want to certainly fast forward, but just reflect a little bit about one of those events in particular. One of those significant events that, for my lifetime, I would say without hyperbole, is the most significant world event in terms of myself as a United States citizen of my entire lifetime. And it starts with this kid in, let's see, I think it was second period American history class, 9th grade, second period. This scrawny little kid sat in his chair at Mechanicsburg Area High School in the 9th grade. And serendipitously enough, it was American history class. And this, I think it was the principal, gets on the intercom and basically says, we're actually going to stop having school today. We're not going to go home necessarily, but we're going to everyone's going to turn on their televisions because there has been a plane that has now rammed itself into one of the World Trade Centers in New York City. And I sat there thinking, like, oh, that's really weird. That's really bizarre. I mean, at first I can distinctly remember thinking that it was actually an accident. I thought, like, okay, well, this seems interesting to stop school for this. And because I actually thought it was just a flight error, a very extremely tragic flight error. And I can remember sitting, by the time we got to 3rd period, which I think was geometry at the time, that year, that's when we realized that it wasn't an accident. It was because the second plane rammed into the second tower. And that day, as a 14-year-old kid, completely changed the trajectory of my life. By the time in which the United States began its military presence in Afghanistan, at the height of it was when I was graduating high school. And a lot of my friends were enlisting. And a lot of my friends were being deployed to places like Afghanistan and Iraq. So it's just very fascinating how this era has been now 2/3 of my entire lifetime. And as of last August, on September 1st of 2021, it felt like that era came to an end. It's now been a few months since we all kind of watched some pretty horrific things on our television screens, but what I saw, I don't know what you saw, but what I saw was 20 years of, the United States military presence in Afghanistan end. And I remember thinking, as I saw video footage of thousands and thousands of people storming the airport in Kabul, Afghanistan, I remember thinking, well, my job is going to be different now. This is going to change things. And it did, and it has. So a little bit of context as we reflect on specifically where we are in refugee resettlement. Two very significant things have happened now in the last 12 months. Number one is, and this is a little bit getting into the weeds, it's a little bit technical, but as the presidential administration had changed, there was willingness, albeit some much reluctance, to increase the amount of refugees that the United States admits into its borders every year. That is determined by the presidential administration. And given that within the last several years, we've had record low numbers of those admissions, there was a willingness to dramatically increase the amount, almost tenfold, into the coming year. So that's one piece. So we knew at Church World Service that we were going to be resettling a lot more families from various parts around the world, whether that be from Syria or Somalia, Iraq, El Salvador, Guatemala, Democratic Republic of Congo, wherever. We knew that, okay, we're going to be receiving a lot more refugee families, which is great. It's what, I mean, it is our work, it is our passion, it's what we do. And so we thought, all right, we need to start scaling up, looking at increasing our resources, hopefully, our staffing capacity, and actually our support from the local church, the local faith community, especially, in order for us to be able to do this work of welcome well. And then the events unfolded with the United States withdrawing all of its remaining troops out of Afghanistan, which totally changed the game in every single way possible. What we saw now it's getting like to be like 4 months ago now. What we saw 4 months ago was the largest humanitarian evacuation that the United States has ever embarked on. More than the fall of Saigon in '75, more than any other time in history where the United States played a significant role of evacuating people out of a country. So over the course of, I think, 2 weeks, hundreds of flights came in and out of the Kabul airport in Afghanistan to fly thousands upon thousands of people out of the country, and just find them a place to stay. It was complete emergency mode in trying to find out where to even, it was certainly building the plane as they flew it, but it was really just get them out and then we'll figure out what to do with them later. And these are people, families and people who would have actually served alongside the US military during those 20 years as interpreters or cultural navigators, and would have very specific fears for their lives as the Taliban took over, I believe in 8 days, but also individuals who felt like there was a significant threat to their lives for various reasons, whether it was their gender or their ethnic group or their religion. As the Taliban took over Afghanistan, they knew that their lives were going to be in danger. And so getting on a plane was really, it felt like the only option. And about 75,000 people did get on planes. What resulted then was the United States bringing around 75,000 people from Afghanistan and temporarily sheltering them at various military bases around the United States. Fort Lee, Fort Pickett, there was bases in Virginia, Wisconsin, New Mexico, and they essentially became, for lack of a better term, and I only use this term because it's the term that our Afghan clients use, camps, refugee camps, where they process thousands of people for both security and health screenings. It was certainly chaotic. CWS Lancaster, even our Lancaster office, was asked to deploy 4 staff members to go down to one of those bases to help with that processing, which we did. I did not go personally, but my colleagues did, because it was sort of an all hands on deck moment. So over the course of several months, a very significant program was shaped and developed by the US State Department in conjunction with the 9 refugee resettlement agencies of the United States, which Church World Service is one of them. And that was, how do we resettle 75,000 Afghani family individuals into the United States in a very short amount of time? It's a tall order. It's a really, really tall order. And it's something that I never thought I would experience in my lifetime. This is something that I constantly tell my wife, whether she wants me to tell it to or not. This is something that I believe my children will read about when they're in second period history class. So my job has been to essentially find sponsors from churches, groups of people who are willing to form teams to walk alongside and provide both services, goods, and friendship to our refugee neighbors as they arrive. I believe by the end of next week, the CWS Lancaster office will have resettled around 132 individuals from Afghanistan since receiving our first one, I believe, in late October. That has constituted as some singles, individuals and couples, some very large families of 10, 12 people they were able to get their entire families on planes. And as families started to arrive and they were getting settled, and we worked diligently on finding permanent housing, on getting their basic needs met, on linking them up with groups of volunteers who could take them to appointments and enroll their kids in school and find jobs. That's when we started to really grapple with what it was we were experiencing through the eyes of what our new neighbors were experiencing. Which gets into why I did not necessarily want to share a whole lot of pictures with you this morning. So I apologize for the lack of visuals, but as I have learned, even over the course of these last few months, about some of the dangers and risks that these families still have to themselves and their families that are still back in Afghanistan. The other day, I had a church group who forms what we call welcome teams. This church group took this family from Afghanistan around the city of Lancaster. And this family does not speak, any English. They're Pashto speaking. And so the language barrier between the church group and the family is, fairly significant. And the father of the family certainly can comprehend more English than he can speak. And they were driving around, and on Duke Street in Lancaster, there is, our public library. And so this volunteer, just pointed out, said, as they were driving down Duke Street, and said, "Oh, there's the library. There's books in there. Do they?" And she asked, "Do they have libraries in Afghanistan?" And the only thing that he could say in English as a response was, "No books, just fighting." A few days later, he confided in those volunteers that he is still a hunted man, as someone who worked with the U.S. military during those 20 years, that there are forces that be, Taliban forces that be, that are looking for him still in Afghanistan. And he still has family, extended family, brothers, aunts and uncles that still live in Afghanistan that he wants to protect. So this is very real for our new neighbors as they navigate not just a place where they do not know the language, they do not know how any, kind of things work. I barely know how things work around here, and I grew up here. Navigating various systems, the healthcare system, the educational system, the employment system, all of these various things, all while under this reality of what it means for their families still back in Afghanistan. I don't say any of this to, kind of bum you out on a Sunday morning. But what I do want to set the stage a little bit about how much this is truly life-saving work. That we fully invite congregations like yourselves to participate in. There's another family from Afghanistan who is living with a host home. And it's been a wonderful experience. I think the family is like 8 people. But this home was a rather large home, and so they had the space, and so they invited them in, and they are part of a local church. And what's so fascinating is their particular welcome team has bonded really well with this family in giving them a safe place to stay and just pure friendship. And the father of that family had made a comment the other day to their host, who is, he is a very devout Muslim, and she is a very devout Christian. And so much of their own personal faiths both converge and diverge on various things. But I don't really think either of them had as in-depth of a relationship with someone from another religion as they have in this moment. And so the father of this family made a comment that he just said, in Afghanistan, they tell us to hate Christians. But I can't anymore after what I've experienced here in your home. And so, I get these, stories sent to me, filtered to me. And yeah, it really is humbling to be part of this work. A woman on one of my teams from a local Episcopal church sent me an email the other day as she was talking to the one mother of this family from Afghanistan that she is walking alongside. And this mother, this elderly mother, her son, her adult son, is still in Afghanistan. He's hiding for his life because he's tied to this family. And she said, Andy, we bonded for several hours, even though we barely spoke each other's language. They were talking to each other through Google Translate. But she said, my son is in prison. And her son is essentially in a prison in Afghanistan. I never thought I would meet someone from a different part of the world who would have my same experience. So there is very significant, I believe, healing that can be done in this line of work. It's something that I hope that I can pass on to my own children as something worth working for. So contextually, because of the rapid expanse of specifically the entire refugee resettlement infrastructure nationwide as a whole, we realized that there's only so much that our own local office in Lancaster can do. There's only so much space here physically in terms of housing. I don't know what it's like. I mean, I kind of do because my parents live in Colonial Park, so I know a little bit about the housing market in your area, and it's sort of the same as it is here. There's just not a whole lot of room here especially with affordable housing. So we looked at a variety of different smaller cities in our surrounding area, and we looked at to possibly open up a sub office in Reading, in York, and we stumbled upon Harrisburg. And we felt like after we did pretty decent analysis and assessments of those areas about the infrastructures of various social services, to the educational systems, to the healthcare systems, we felt like Harrisburg would be a good fit for opening up a sub office. Sorry, pardon me, talking a lot. And it was so interesting because they said, okay, we're going to go and start laying the groundwork for opening up an office in Harrisburg. And I grew up in Harrisburg. That is my home. And I can remember going home and I remember asking my dad, I was like, we're thinking about opening up an office in Harrisburg, resettling refugees in Harrisburg. What do you think about that? Do you think that'll work? And my dad is not the most optimistic person on the planet Earth. He was like, yeah, I don't know. Could this be a welcoming community? I was like, hey, I've not lived in Harrisburg for 11 years, so I don't know. What's so fascinating is ever since we announced publicly that we were opening an office in Harrisburg, I have received more outpouring of support of people who want to get involved from both, the sort of Dauphin County area, the Cumberland County area, than I could have ever imagined. Every other day I'm fielding, sort of an inquiry from a church here, a church there, who want to get involved. And so I have been also humbled by that response of people who want to step up to the plate in the midst of a 2-year-old pandemic, to welcome new refugee friends and neighbors. And so what I have been doing is hopefully laying the groundwork for when that Harrisburg office is open, which, as Marilyn alluded to, there is now a site director identified, and he is getting his feet under him. He is now an office of one. Great guy. My immediate desire and vision is to immediately link him up with your congregation as soon as possible, and just sort of let him take the reins on that. And so, yeah, he is collating all of these interested parties who want to get involved, and they are certainly looking for hiring a number of new staff, including caseworkers, cultural navigators, and volunteer specialists. But it's going to take some time. All while, as far as I know, there's not going to be a whole lot of hesitancy for the Harrisburg office to start actually resettling families, because they're arriving and they need to go somewhere. I was just talking to Alex earlier this week about, some of the things that he's been hearing from our global office in terms of timelines around when families might start arriving in Harrisburg. And it's happening pretty quick. It's funny how, it feels like it was back in October, we thought, okay, we want to have a site director identified and an office opened by January 1st. Well, that's now 9 days after January 1st. So yeah, I think the biggest way for any congregation in the area to get involved, and I don't just mean, financially supporting the Harrisburg office, but what we need, what Alex needs, is our boots on the ground, people who are willing to walk alongside these families that are arriving. I had alluded to, our welcome team program in particular, which I would absolutely love for this church to possibly get involved in, selecting about 8 to 12 people, which there are, I think, on this call alone. Look at that. To basically walk alongside client families for this, the 6 months of their resettlement period. That can look like a variety of things. That initial welcoming, supplying furniture and household items for people, helping kids, if there are kids in the family, helping them register for schooling, getting to medical appointments, figuring out how to navigate, bus systems and how to find jobs. All of these, these various things that CWS staff do, but can, do as part of our jobs, but cannot do really without additional volunteer support, because they are an extension of who we are. They are hands and feet on the ground. So I wanted to be very cognizant of this hard 10 o'clock stop. And I wanted to be able to field questions, which they're in the chat necessarily, but if, yeah, that was a lot of talking. So if anyone does have any questions, I am an open book.
As an organization, what criteria might you use to screen where you are sending refugees? Are you looking at education, or are you looking at language, English as a second language schools? Are you looking, in other words, what do you do to place a family somewhere to make sure they're being placed at a good place?
Yeah. What's fascinating about the Harrisburg area is that, we don't have the 35 years of relationships built like we do in Lancaster. So a lot of the different infrastructures of things that would make it a welcoming community, we're kind of even relying on the local congregation to kind of give us windows into what that looks like, in terms of healthcare providers and educational systems. And so that's why Harrisburg as a whole, as we assessed all of these different things, talk to city council leaders of Reading, New York, and Harrisburg. That's why Harrisburg was identified, because we felt like it was a place that had the ability to meet our clients' needs. In terms of housing, a lot of the way in which we identify specific housing for specific families, it really is on a case-by-case basis. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so we work with landlords and property managers who are willing to kind of take a risk on having tenants from various different cultures who don't have any employment history, but have the institutional backing of CWS. So yeah, there's a variety of different factors. We've communicated with the school district of Harrisburg, Mechanicsburg School District, about things that they offer in terms of ESL, and obviously the school district of Harrisburg already has a fairly diverse student population, so they have those kinds of systems in place, which is really good. So yeah, there's and then the last thing, and I won't get into it, but the next big thing that we're going to have to really decipher out is employers as well.
Is CWS responsible for the housing, to find the housing, or does the church play a role in that?
So we are responsible for finding the housing. The Harrisburg office does not have a housing specialist as of yet. And so I do think in this context, there will be a little bit more of a reliance on the community at large, even just giving leads on potential housing. Yeah, so if there are landlords, property managers in your congregation or in your own social networks that would be willing to do something like this, that would be greatly appreciated.
Go ahead, Marilyn.
Andrew, do you have a physical office location yet, or are you still searching for that?
I think they've identified one. Alex is still working out of his house because I don't think the commercial lease has been signed yet, but I think it's near Front Street in Harrisburg.
So it's in the downtown section of Harrisburg, as opposed to Allison Hill or
right. Yeah.
Suburbs. Okay.
I have a question. Does Church World Service offer training to the volunteers?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, like, is that a time commitment of so many hours, or?
Sure. So yeah. So the training is essentially, there's an application process, clearances, that as Alex, continues to work with the church, we'll be able to kind of go into more detail. But there is a one-time orientation session for all volunteers. It's about, it's obviously been, we used to have it in person. We've been doing it now Zoom for the last 2 years, really. It's about 2 hours, kind of refugee 101 stuff. However, the more significant training, in my view, is when a family is identified to be matched with the congregation. There is then a follow-up orientation specifically about the family itself, their cultural context, religious context, and how the team can help best welcome this particular family.
Thank you.
When you have a large number of refugees, how do you determine which refugees go where?
Yeah, that's probably the most interesting part of my job, really. And I remember asking my predecessor that, and she just said, "Go with your gut." We do get notices. Sometimes 3 days notice, sometimes 3 weeks notice that a family is arriving. Not a big fan of the 3-day notice, but just looking at the size, really just the size of the family and who I have fully through that training process. Then, there's certainly not an exact science. It's more of an art.
Who is responsible? I'm sorry. Who is responsible for the screening of the families prior to them being assigned to Lancaster, to your organization here?
Yeah, so they are screened by the United Nations High Commissioner of Refugees, the UNHCR.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I have a question regarding communications. Once you start talking to the families, I can imagine that just a general lifestyle is so alien to what they have experienced that there has to be major upheaval for them to even come to grips with how we live as a society. Do you see problems in the new families adapting, or is it just a communication problem that once they communicate and understand, they kind of tend to meld in easier?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I hesitate to say, it all depends case by case basis. But remember that these are also very, resilient people. They have undergone things that I never will in my lifetime. And so some do, adapt better than others. And I really do think that part of what makes the adaptation and integration successful is when there is a community like, sort of a welcome team or a sponsoring group that helps facilitate that integration, that adaptation. Certainly, there are times when some families don't have sponsors, and yeah, it just doesn't work as well. But yeah, there's no doubt that there is certainly, with language, we make referrals to, our clients are mandated to enroll in ESL classes to, hopefully help bridge some of those language and communication gaps. But yeah, I would say that community support is one of the biggest factors that helps with that integration.
Andrew, may I speak? Do you participate in some of these trainings? Now, I forget how long you've been on the job here. Do you participate in some of these trainings?
The trainings for volunteers, yes. Myself and 2 of my coworkers, we facilitate them.
So do you follow all the way through? In other words, what happens? Okay, I have a personal experience with a friend who was in a church down there in Lancaster, and she shared with me several ups and downs of the process and what they go through. I found and had suggested to our group that it would also maybe be helpful to have somebody like that explain what exactly a church goes through. you are from the training side, but
Right.
see where these families carry through and how they land on their feet, whether they do they choose, throw their hands up in the air and say, I can't do this. I want to move, or I want to go someplace else where there are more people like me. And some of the, again, ups and downs of the training, especially with the language barriers. So I realize there's a lot of that, but I don't know. I've sort of lost, well, with the pandemic, we've all sort of lost track of what they were doing because I don't know whether they've been active. So anyway, I was just wondering how you approach that. And I was thinking about our church becoming involved with someone in Harrisburg and the kind of training that you need, especially when you say no language, the language barrier and everything. I know what this one church went through and the ups and the downs, and it can be extremely challenging if you aren't trained well.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I don't sugarcoat that either. It can be challenging.
Right.
As much as it can be life-changing, rewarding, transformative,
That's right.
it can also put you through the fire. And so, my desire and my hope is that, our volunteers and our teams are. What's fascinating about training is I have a personal, a fascinating relationship with the concept of further training or further resourcing. More often than not, I will admit, when an issue has occurred, usually a negative one, and a team comes back to me and says like, hey, this thing happened. We didn't know what to do. So we did this, we did X, Y, and Z, and then it kind of blew up in our faces. We didn't know what to do. And I politely said like, well, what did we go over in training? And they would often say, oh, that's right, we did go over that in training. So like, I think, yeah, education and information is good to an extent. Living into actual experiences is what really molds. I think for communication, there is my biggest thing with training is really gaining a better understanding of culture and language.
Right.
That those two things, though we can't hold trainings on teaching volunteers the actual dialects of our clients unless they want to go out and learn Swahili or Arabic, hopefully giving them the tools and resources to be able to communicate as well as they can. Luckily, there are a number of resources that actually do work fairly well. Translation services.
Yeah. Your phone with
Well, yeah. So like I just learned of one. I mean, people, we always talk about Google Translate, and that's okay. It works, but there are others of resources that we heavily promote to our volunteers that actually even do video interpretation calls. Like you can call into this one app and get a translator on the phone or on a video call.
Right.
If there's really something that you're trying to communicate and just can't get there.
Right.
So the next step for Derry, will Alex reach out to us and talk to us and see what we can do if we want to?
Well, are we still, now I'm curious, are we still slated?
Next week.
Yeah.
So for next week, is it the same class?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I wanted to lay a little bit of the groundwork and have him come to next week to kind of really give him the spotlight to share his vision and connect on a better level too.
That would be great.
Even, excuse me, even if we don't have a true in-person class, if he comes to the church, then the Zoom can happen from there.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, anybody that wants to come from our group certainly could. But that I think would, you know, obviously the ice overlay today just complicated things.
Yeah, yeah, no, ice, COVID, it's all, just a hot mess.
Yeah, we can be flexible however we need to do it next week.
Okay.
Can go from home again, or could open things up a little bit more. And it's just about 10 o'clock. This is the church's account. We're supposed to hard fast be done at 10 o'clock. And of course, you can hold if you have any more questions, you can of course hold them over to next week. And other than that, I say stay safe, and thank you, Andrew, for your presentation. We look forward to seeing you next week, and hopefully see Alex also. And any last words for us, Andrew?
Oh, just thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. Have a lovely day.
Thank everybody for coming in and attending. It's a nice group and great questions. Appreciate it, folks.
Yep,
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
bye.